All right, it looks like it is now 12 o'clock Central, so let's get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Samantha Oakley from ALA's Public Programs Office. I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar, It's Never Too Early, Media Literacy in Children's Programming. Before we start, I'd like to make a few quick announcements. Today's webinar is presented by ALA's Public Programs Office with support from ALA's Cultural Communities Fund. To learn more about the Cultural Communities Fund or make a contribution, visit ala.org/ccf. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with Programming Librarian, a website of ALA's Public Programs Office. We have a lot of program ideas and an online learning library full of free webinars just like this one. A couple of notes about our virtual classroom. Only our presenters have microphone access, but you are welcome to type your questions or comments in the chat box. To send a chat message, move your cursor to the bottom of the Zoom window and click Chat. If you have any technical issues, please use the Q&A window to communicate with ALA staff. To send a message through the Q&A feature, move your cursor to the bottom of the Zoom window and click on Q&A. Please do not put technical questions in the chat window as they could be missed if that window is very busy. We will respond to your technical questions as quickly as possible. Note that this session is being recorded, so if you would like to review any information, you may do so via the archived version that we send out within 24 hours of the live session. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenters for this afternoon, Dorothy Stoltz and Claudia Haynes. Dorothy is the Director for Community Engagement at Carroll County Public Library in Maryland, where she connects people of all ages with resources to enhance their lifelong learning. She is co-author of several books for ALA, such as Transform and Thrive, Ideas to Invigorate Your Library and Community, and numerous articles including Augmented Reality Brings Early Industry to Life, and the ALSC white paper, Media Mentorship in Libraries Serving Youth. Co-presenting with Dorothy today is Claudia Haynes. Claudia supports kids, teens, and families with dynamic programs and access to great media of all kinds as the Youth Services Librarian at the Homer Public Library in Homer, Alaska. She advises and trains other librarians on media mentorship and serves on both local and national committees that support families and literacy. Claudia has written for multiple sources on the topic of media mentorship and literacy in the digital age. And with that, I'm pleased to turn the mic over to our presenters.
Hello, everybody. This is Claudia. I'm going to go ahead and start. I have a little pause here. Here we go. So again, this is about media literacy in the early years. And before we get started, I want to give you a little overview of our plan. So to kind of lay some groundwork, we're going to talk about what we mean when we say media, including both traditional and new media. We're going to define media literacy. There's a few slides we'll talk about that so that as we move forward, you know where we're starting from. We're going to talk about media literacy skills and the role of the library and the role of the librarian. And then we're going to ground media literacy in the idea of media mentorship. And then we're going to look at specific examples, both at the Homer Public Library and then at the Carroll County Library and at some other Maryland libraries, so that you can see what media literacy in programming looks like. And we'll include some of the tips that we share with grown-ups so they can kind of extend that learning experience at home. And then we'll, of course, have time for question and answers. But before we dive in, let's play an icebreaker. So this game you may be familiar with, but it's called Two Truths and a Lie. So here is how the game today is going to work. It's actually going to be a poll. And you need to figure out which one of the three is a lie. So when the poll pops up, you will select if 1, 2, or 3 is the lie, making the other 2 the truths. So the first one, as you can see, is media literacy means being able to tell if information on the internet is true. Number 2 is media literacy should be taught to teenagers. And 3 is from 2011 to 2017, time spent on screens for 0 to 8-year-olds has tripled. Okay, so in just a moment, we'll see a poll pop up. And so pick which one of the 3 is the lie. You'll be happy to see that the hosts and panelists cannot vote. And after the results come in, I will briefly go over each one of the 3 so you know which one is the lie. And for those of you on the West Coast or here in Alaska, this kind of gets our brains working. Those of you who are on the East Coast, this is kind of a nice afternoon. Pick me up after lunch. Okay, so it looks like most of you picked the first one. So let's start there. So media literacy means being able to tell if information on the internet is true. Yes, but it's much more than that, and we'll explain how. 2, media literacy should be taught for teenagers. This is true, but what about elementary age kids, preschoolers, toddlers, and grown-ups? 3, so 3 is the outright lie. Data from Common Sense Media Survey in 2017 showed that children birth to 8 spent about 2.25 hours per day on screen media, which is nearly the same as in 2011. So 2017 was 2 hours and 19 minutes. In 2011, time was 2 hours and 16 minutes. So thanks for playing our game. Let's get started with the real business for today. So I'm going to pass the mic over here to Dorothy and let her talk about what we mean by media.
Thank you, Claudia. Let's see if we can get the slides forward. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. We are delighted that you're here, and we'd like to start with a brief background on media literacy to lead into a conversation around programming. It is vital to know how to navigate, verify, and trust information, whether from traditional or new media. For traditional media, we might think in terms of books, magazines, DVDs, books on CD, etc. The skills needed by library staffers to engage families with media literacy include being familiar with collections and content, knowing how to locate what customers ask for or need, and using good people skills. So being welcoming and approachable and knowing how to ask the right questions to determine interests and needs. So new media, which includes apps and a variety of digital, online, and technology sources, require all those same skills, plus an emphasis on knowing criteria and trusted resources and trusted sources for high quality information. So we're going to use a definition based on the National Association of Media Literacy Education, or NAMLE. Media literacy is the ability to access and analyze, evaluate and create media in a variety of forms, from print to video to using the internet. In addition, it's the ability to act on or activate insights and integrate them into daily life using a wide range of digital and emerging technologies. And we're going to talk a bit about emerging technologies today as well. Media literacy is not about automatically championing new technologies, but it builds on traditional literacy and offers new forms of reading and writing. For example, when we read an online news feed, we may be understanding only bits and pieces of the story. Or when we read an online article, the reader may be invited to click on to get more information from a website or a blog post, or to view video footage. Quote unquote reading is no longer only a linear experience from sentence to sentence or paragraph to paragraph. The media literacy definition continues. We have where it really builds an understanding of the role of media in society as an essential skill for inquiry and self-expression necessary to become productive and active citizens. Now, looking at why are we doing this webinar, it's because children may automatically believe what they read or watch or view or hear. It's important to help children develop these media literacy skills, and some examples include to find trustworthy resources by tracing information and ideas back to their original source to determine credibility, to use discernment to help children grow up with several abilities, such as separating fact from fiction, sifting through ideas and understanding the layers of a complex issue, to determine criteria for high quality content, and ultimately to learn to think for themselves. Another skill is to develop patience, which is really an active skill of slowing down, using poise, and practicing right timing to digest and respond to media, to become a genial reader who thoughtfully reflects on content and is able to edit what does or doesn't work. And library staff can model how to spark curiosity and the joy of lifelong learning, how to bring out the best in a learning situation by using critical thinking skills, and then how to celebrate human kindness, ingenuity, and growth. There are several opportunities online and through a variety of technology. While libraries are still focused on books, information is increasingly found through technology. Here's a small example: Hoopla, Tumble Books, Overdrive. There's a joint effort between Lisa Guernsey at New America and Michael Levine at Joan Gann's CUNY Center at Sesame Workshop called Tap, Click, Read. And it offers an online portal with helpful information for families to put media literacy into action at home. And another great resource is PBS Online. If you're not familiar with some of their latest developments, you might want to take a look at, they have resources for both families and teachers. And they really follow that model of the brilliant Fred Rogers in using media in the best possible ways for children's learning. And I'll turn this over to Claudia.
So our appreciation for media literacy is really grounded in our work around media mentorship. So a media mentor supports children and their families in their media decisions and practice around media use. And a media mentor has access to and shares recommendations for and research on children's media use. So we incorporate media mentorship and media literacy into programming, supported access to a broad array of media evaluation, and media advisory. So a media mentorship isn't just an interest of Dorothy and mine. You can read more in the white paper pictured at the right that we co-authored for ALSC, and much more online if you're interested. Sorry, there's a little delay here. There we go. So media mentorship, media literacy, and tech in general are being integrated into the expectations of our roles as children's librarians in the library. And whether we're children's librarians, children's staff, if we work with children and families, there is this expectation that we're going to understand and appreciate how technology fits into our lives. And so competencies are not always on in the forefront of people's minds, not something that people always read. So I wanted to share this visual representation by Lisa Nolane of some of the most recent ALSC competencies. And media mentorship and technology are mentioned specifically in sections 2, 3, and 4. And I just wanted to read you a couple of those pieces so you'd get an idea of what the library field is thinking about in terms of what we're talking about today. So in section 2, reference and user services, the competencies say that a children's librarian provides advisory to youth regardless of format and according to their interests and abilities. She identifies digital media needs through formal and informal interactions and applies strategies to support those needs. So that may be the traditional reader advisory or what I like to call the media advisory, right? The reference interview even. So in section 3, under programming skills, a children's librarian integrates appropriate technology in program design and delivery. In section 4, knowledge, curation, and management of materials, a children's librarian demonstrates knowledge, management, use, and appreciation of children's literature, multimodal materials, digital media, and other materials that contribute to a diverse, current, and relevant children's collection. A children's librarian understands and applies criteria for evaluating the content, artistic merit, and cultural authenticity of children's materials in all genres and formats. He keeps up to date on teen and adult digital and print reference sources that may serve the needs of children and their caregivers. So what does media programming for children actually look like? So let's first look at programming at my library, the Homer Public Library. Before I move forward, I want to share a little bit about the Homer Public Library to provide some context. So Homer is a rural community that sits on the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. The community is accessible by one road. We're about 220 miles south of Anchorage. You can also get to my community by boat or plane. The city is home to about 5,200 people, and the standalone library also serves another 7,000 in remote communities accessible by dirt road, float plane, or boat. The water, we're right on the water, so you get the boat theme here. We have a youth services staff of 1, that's me. The community is made up of avid mobile adopters, including Coast Guard families, families with members who work even more remotely during parts of the year, like commercial fishermen and oil slope workers. And then we have families living in cabins that don't have landline capability. Some might not have consistent electricity even. So these families use digital media to get natural disaster information, such as earthquakes, wildfires, avalanches, which have all happened to our community, our region within the last year. They stay connected with each other while one member is working remotely, sometimes for months at a time. They stay in touch with their extended family living out of state. This is really essential for Coast Guard families who may come in for 2 or 3 years at a time. And then they also use it to fill out important forms that are now only digital, to renew library materials, or stream the latest TV show. So our library is a standalone library. We're not part of a broader system. We're funded by the city of Homer. Our Friends group provides funding for all our programs. That's not within the regular library budget. So what you'll see from here on is done primarily with organized by myself, but with a pretty limited budget. And any excess funding comes through grants or donations. Okay, so why does the Homer Public Library include media literacy in our programs for kids? What if the question was actually, how do we use unplugged and digital tools to teach literacy skills that support living and learning in our connected world? What if we help them develop a critical eye from the start? After all, children are naturally curious and learning at a rapid rate about the world around them. So youth programming at my library is focused on the 3 areas that you can see on the right that directly respond to this question. They are early literacy, so what children know about communication, languages, both verbal and nonverbal, reading and writing before they can actually read and write. That's a definition found in the book Supercharged Storytimes. We also include computational thinking and computer science, and I'll briefly talk about that in a minute. And then media literacy, right, which we've already defined. We use a range of tools to support these key areas, including books, robots, iPads, computers, paint, and more. So, but ultimately, it's not necessarily about the tool, but about the learning experience. So what is the goal of the program? For the audience to learn a particular skill, to understand how a particular tool works, to help a particular audience access information in a new way? Those questions all come up. So how do we do this? So let's look at preschool story time, for example. I might focus on emotions and how they are expressed with our bodies and in illustrations using the book Mad Mad Bear by Kimberly G and the title Hooray for Hat by Brian Wan. So this is a nice opportunity to introduce visual literacy, a key ingredient of media literacy in an image-rich media landscape like ours. I'll ask kids what they notice and create conversation about their responses and predictions based on the observations. I make time to explain to grown-ups that visual literacy is what we notice in the images, our feelings about those images, and the message of the media. Sharing a picture book provides a preschool-friendly way of talking about visual literacy and ultimately media literacy. So then we can use the Faces I Make app pictured on the right as a group to make visual representations of the emotions we were talking about in the books, and maybe even some new ones. So I hold the device myself and have kids use their words to direct me. After story time, kids can explore the app with their families on the mounted iPads we have in the library. So giving kids names for their emotions, letting them express themselves, even if they are nonverbal, and creating images using a variety of tools are all effective ways to model how to support media literacy skills if the connection is made to media literacy, right? So for grown-ups interested in using the Faces I Make app at home, I suggest they use the digital tool together. Children learn more when they explore media with a grown-up or another child, and we call this joint media engagement. This together time provides support when a child needs to problem solve. It provides an opportunity for rich back and forth conversation that can grow vocabulary in a meaningful way. And it provides ideas that can provide real world play. So I also use new media in story time. And so that's kind of whatever the latest media might be. And it depends on the program theme and goals, the audience, the location, the content or learning experience I want to share. So for example, in the image on the left, I'm sharing a video about emperor penguins in Antarctica from BBC on YouTube Kids. So the short video shows how penguins migrate to find food and then how they find their mate and young when they return home. It's a really fascinating video for kids and grown-ups and ties in nicely with the books and activities that I was sharing. So for grown-ups, I talk about why they may want to use YouTube Kids at home as an alternative to YouTube for video streaming. And sharing tips on how I evaluate digital media for your young children gives grown-ups tools for evaluating and selecting digital media at home. So on the right, children are coding with a Codapillar as part of a robot story time. Using tangible tech to code helps even young children learn how computers, source of digital media, work in a really fun way. So this is similar to exploring how books work. I show kids how authors and illustrators use the physical parts of a book to create a unique experience, and then give kids supported access to the materials and opportunities to make illustrations, and then tell their stories in books even. So that for me is kind of the parallel. So in Storytime with Robots, I'm providing access to a programmable toy that many families don't have at home. And I'm doing it in a way that supports learning and models some of the early literacy practices and computational thinking dispositions in the image above, created by Paula Langston of the DC Public Library and myself. So what is computational thinking, or CT, and what does it have to do with Storytime and media literacy? So computational thinking does not really have one unifying definition across all disciplines. It's kind of an emerging field. But WGBH, a public media company currently developing computational thinking preschool content, uses this definition. CT is a set of foundational thinking skills that enables children to identify, understand, and creatively solve problems. It's a systematic way of thinking that is applicable to a wide range of disciplines, including math, science, engineering, and even traditional literacy. So CT is not the same thing as coding or computer programming, but it is a precursor in that it can help children learn how to solve problems in a way that could be carried out by a computer. So this is, I think, really important because with all things, all learning experiences that we're providing children, we're not necessarily saying that they're going to be experts, but we're giving them the foundation that they will build on as they grow. So CT is something that can be learned at a young age, just like children sing the alphabet before they learn to read, or count before they learn addition and subtraction. Preschoolers can practice basic CT skills that can set the groundwork for more complex skills later on. So going back to Namely's definition, in order to access, analyze, evaluate, and create media, kids need to know how the media works. So I'm teaching kids how computers work in a developmentally appropriate way, with or without digital tools, using the problem-solving process of CT. So the brochure on the right provides families with low and high-tech examples of how they can support CT at home. So for example, to support the CT skill of decomposition, which involves identifying, classifying, and using similarities, I encourage families to go on a color scavenger hunt and look for a specific color in different places they visit around town. So another way to support living and learning in a connected world is by emphasizing media literacy during class visits to the library. So class visits help me connect with kids who may or may not come to the library on their own for whatever reason, right? So I may use a pretty traditional format, the paper book, to launch a conversation about media literacy. So here I am outside with a class of first graders sharing the book Wolf in the Snow by Matthew Cordell on our library story walk. So we learned about and identified techniques that Matthew Cordell uses to tell his story and convey emotion, the passage of time, and action. So then we went inside and created our own ink and watercolored images using similar techniques in an attempt to replicate the reading experience that Cordell created. So I like to ask the question, how can we leverage something like the Caldecott Medal, traditional media evaluation, to talk about media literacy across mediums? So evaluating media is something we do every time we buy a book for our libraries, select a book for Storytime, and choose a database subscription, for example. So I also evaluate apps for the iPads we have in our library, and digital media of all kinds, to include, for example, in displays featuring paper books about specific topics. I like to think that, you know, families today are using lots of different kinds of media, so I want to reflect that in how we share information at the library. And I like to be transparent about why I choose a title and articulate why I select it. In Storytime, for example, I'll mention why I chose a title so grown-ups can hear some of the features I'm looking for in high-quality media for kids. For example, I read or view content before I share it with children to check if it's age appropriate, if the information is well researched and accurate, and if the images authentically represent the hopefully diverse characters featured. Notice I didn't talk about format there. So similar characteristics that I'm looking for across formats. So pictured here are some of the resources I use both to evaluate media for kids and provide media advisory. On the left is the KidMap checklist, which I created with KidMap thanks to support from the Joan Ganz Cooney Center. KidMap stands for the Kids Inclusive and Diverse Media Action Project. And the link to this checklist will be in the resources you'll get later on. So on the top right is a brochure for families, which shares suggestions for using digital media, particularly with young children, and tips for selecting high quality digital media. And then on the bottom right is a screenshot from my library's Pinterest board showing apps featured on our mounted iPads. And within each image, I also include some information. All right, so here's evaluation in action, right? So in my media evaluation and selection, I'm always looking for media that authentically represents Alaska. It's tough out there, friends. So as Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop says, books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And I think this applies to all kinds of media, and highlighting OwnVoices media has been well received by my community. We get a lot of books in my community, or a lot of media in general, that acts as windows or sliding glass doors, but the mirror part is really something I search for. Here are two programs based around this idea of looking for relevant media, right? So we've offered these programs very recently. So on the left are the two authors who wrote the book, How Raven Got His Crooked Nose, and they are reading it and talking about the making of the book. This story is a retelling of a Denina tale originally told to the author, that's the mother on the left. And she wrote this book with her son, and an author illustrated it and included some interesting kind of graphic novel techniques into it. So it's a really interesting story that you should look for. And then on the right is a flyer from an advanced screening of the PBS show Molly of Denali. Hopefully many of you have heard about it. And it tells the story of Molly, who lives in a fictionalized Alaska town. And what's really cool is that Alaska Native writers, voice actors, and musicians were used throughout the show's production. So Molly of Denali is an interesting show for another reason, because it aims to support young children's understanding of informational text, another aspect of early literacy. So WGBH, the producer of the show, describes informational text as any text created for the main purpose of providing information. So informational text can be created using written words, oral language, visuals, or a combination of these forms. In the world of early literacy, this show broadens appreciation for how information is shared, helps us look at literacy in a variety of ways, and provides new opportunities for supporting media literacy. So two programs, the next one are for a little bit older kids, and they are programs that we offered this summer. So the From Scratch summer coding camp we offered focused on making digital stories using the Scratch coding language. You can see my co-leader, Carmen, working on a problem with a young coder, young programmer, and then you can see some of the paperwork we did in developing our stories. And then in the bottom right, you can see a screenshot of the story that Carmen and I worked on as an example. And so this was a highly successful, fun program that offered lots of unexpected turns, which was really good for modeling how we approach those turns. So the idea was to incorporate traditional storytelling skills into a program teaching kids how to create with a digital tool, really learning how these tools are made. So the 5-day program started out using Google's CS First curriculum on Chromebooks owned by the library. But Carmen, again, who's pictured here, and I spent each afternoon modifying the next day's activities and building on our own digital story based on what the kids were wanting to do with their stories. And again, we used our story to model key concepts and create conversations as kids analyzed and evaluated how we made the story work. So digital storytelling makes kids playwrights, authors, illustrators, and programmers all at the same time. Kids created stories that made us laugh, feel sympathy for characters who were lost, or cheer on adventurous ones. Anonymized Scratch accounts allowed kids to continue the creative process at home, and free paper passports and sticker badges from Google encouraged kids to try new techniques and explore different features of the Scratch platform. Parents and caregivers came on the last day to see their kids present, which was really great because a lot of the parents asked a lot of questions about the media, how Scratch works, as well as about the stories. And lastly, I wanted to talk about this big group of girls right here. So up until this school year, no computer science courses were taught at the local high school. CS courses help young people learn how computers work so they can better understand how they're being used in our everyday lives and how they can be used, right? So one goal of my involvement with ALA's Libraries Ready to Code project was to create this community conversation about the lack of CS courses and what that meant going forward for youth. So at the library, I recognized a gap: limited access to CS, computer science, and computational thinking learning experiences, especially for girls and young women. But I also recognized an opportunity to engage young people as leaders and mentors. Enter NC-WIT, the National Center for Women in Information Technology. So programs like the Girls Get It Alaska Camp, funded by a grant from NC-WIT, provide underrepresented populations like girls in rural Alaska access to learning opportunities that support media literacy skills. So these kids, these girls created digital content, pulled apart and analyzed computer hardware, successfully programmed robots, and even created mini websites. So for the teens that are pictured, there are 2 on either edge and 2 mixed in. They planned and led the camp, wrote the grant, evaluated and selected what tools and skills to include, designed experiences that empowered the younger girls, and learned lots themselves in the process. So again, NC-WIT supplied the grant. I acted as the fiscal partner and mentor. The camp was hosted at the library as part of our summer programs. And again, at the very end, parents and caregivers were invited to the last day to hear about what the girls had been doing so that they could kind of ask questions at home to follow up and support the learning experience. So now let's head off to Maryland.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to start with talking a little bit about collaboration at the state level. Try again. There we go. So in Maryland, as in many states, there's oftentimes a state library and a library association. But we also have an association of public library administrators. All of these groups work together to not only share information, but to be inspired by each other. And they work around library policies, effective practices, and trends. And oftentimes there are funding collaborations as well. So in recent years, many libraries across the country, really, not just in Maryland, but we're upping the ante around emerging technologies, media literacy, and makerspace activities. So a little background on Carroll. We are predominantly rural. We have suburban clusters around several towns. We have about 167,000 people total. There are 6 library branches, and each branch has a children's department with a supervisor plus a couple of staff. In addition, we have more flexibility. We have more flexibility through our outreach department to add to that service delivery. And we have 3 mobile service units there. Collaboration is a Carroll County hallmark to promote economic and educational opportunities, but also to respond to challenges like creating local food pantries, like in many communities. Or being trained to administer Narcan to prevent opioid overdoses. Now, although Carroll continues to be agricultural predominantly, that's our #1 industry, we're increasingly expanding into tech industries. We are extremely fortunate to be in close proximity to Baltimore, where the technology industry is flourishing in recent years. In 2018, Maryland created a project designed to use peer coaching to improve media literacy mentorship. The project was spearheaded by Harford County. Carroll and Baltimore counties were on the steering committee. And we worked very closely with Lisa Guernsey from New America, plus a group called Resources in Reading. And Elaine Zarnicki was our point person there. This was funded through IMLS and the Maryland State Library. As a result of the project, a toolkit was created. It includes information and content on conducting staff assessment and parent focus groups. We designed worksheets for peer-to-peer observation and self-reflection. And we used the book, Becoming a Media Mentor, reading a chapter or two every month for group discussion. And just to say thank you, Claudia, for that book. The online toolkit is an openly licensed resource, so please feel free to use all of its components, and we hope it'll be helpful. I'd like to thank Connie Strittmatter, who was at Harford at the time, she's now at Baltimore County, for her exceptional leadership on the project and the toolkit. This is a link that would take you to, in the toolkit, directly to the technology tips for parents. And this is a tip offering a list of best websites and encouraging parents to talk with their children about what makes a site a trusted source. In this way, parents can make an impact at home by helping children to learn to think for themselves around what is and is not credible information. I describe our school library partnership as a strong, high-performing collaboration, and this SCORE Challenge event is an example. SCORE stands for Student Collaboration of Research Exploration. It is designed to support the media literacy skill development of middle schoolers with an emphasis on finding credible and reliable information. On the left is Spheros, the spherical robot that students can program easily using apps downloaded to either iPad or an Android device. It provides a great entry point for inquiry, inventive thinking, and coding, and the kit starts at about $50. Osmos on the right is a combination digital and physical learning experience for coding, math, drawing, and spatial relational skills, and that kit starts around $100. And we're mentioning specific products only because they have been a tool for quality programming. STEM projects provide skill development opportunities. In Howard County, the library offers activities such as building a hovercraft or a quadrotor drone. These projects give students the opportunity to apply engineering skills using commonly available materials and equipment. A teen lab production camp at the Prince George's County Memorial Library System gives access to instruction, high-tech equipment, and software for students to develop their ability to create their own music and videos. By setting up a very simple photo booth with a backdrop and inexpensive props, it's an easy way to offer opportunity for families to create together. Providing access on the right to green screen technology offers an excellent experience for deeper learning and engagement for the entire family. We thought it was important in Carroll to focus on all STEAM disciplines in our makerspace, not only science, technology, engineering, and math, but also art. In addition, like Claudia was mentioning, we pay attention to social emotional development. So for example, providing opportunities for families to tinker together offers social connections, just like in story times for both adults and children. Developing design and art skills as a family team is integral to supporting 3D printing creations. community outreach to after-school programs, such as, or rather to after-school programs and to the Boys and Girls Club, can be very doable. For example, we took snap circuits out that can help develop the skill of problem solving and learning to experience the satisfaction of a job well done. On the right, we partnered with an education group called Future Makers to help students create a personal LED light or LED light brush that they use to make their own light paintings. And they use smartphones or computer tablets that we provide to learn to take long exposure photographs. Although we have many programs using everyday materials, these make and learn programming kit collections are an easy and relatively inexpensive way to feature STEM. You'll notice the Codapillar is in our collection, as Claudia had mentioned, using it in her library. And these kits range from $25 to $300. The kit collections are for staff to use in programming, but also for our community partners, educators, child care providers, and homeschool families who can borrow them for a week at a time. The kit collections target children from preschool to age 14, and amazingly, the library did not pay for any of these collections. Like Claudia was saying, we have a lot of different partners and grants and so on. Our state library gave us $4,000 to start the collection. A year later, a local bank donated $5,000 to expand the collection. And this year, through a school partnership, we received $7,500 in state education grants. So needless to say, we were absolutely thrilled. I'm going to take a few minutes to focus on emerging technologies. My library has an applied technologies team and a tech programming team. We've developed tech competencies. We have the expectation that all staff tinker and play with high-tech and low-tech applications. We have an excellent partnership, for example, with a community robotics club on the left there to offer activities in our branches. Again, with state grant funding, we purchased mini drones in the photo in the center. And I'd like to make another note about budgeting. Like with the Make and Learn kits, nearly all of our emerging technology resources that I'm mentioning were funded by sponsors, grants, and partnerships. On the right is actually a free resource. It's a new resource called Google 3D, and it creates an augmented reality interaction with a tiger, a bear, an alpine goat, or other large animal. And you can see that my colleague Sharon and I had a lot of fun the other day in the reception area at headquarters. The instructions for this Google feature are on the slide, but they're also in the resource page that will be handed out or sent out to you with the webinar connection. And I'd like to ask if after the webinar, if you play with the feature, please take a photo and send it to us. Another reason why this topic is important is that there is a need in the community for access and for an introduction to emerging technologies. VR, or virtual reality, and AR, augmented reality, will soon be entering the mainstream consumer world at a much faster pace in coming years. And it will be through education, healthcare, industry, and businesses. So how do we prepare our communities to use these new technologies effectively and to become media literate and tech savvy? In Maryland, Baltimore County and Carroll County libraries worked with the state library to create what we called a virtual reality roadshow. This was one way to promote awareness and access to media and technology. Virtual reality is a fully immersive computer-generated environment. Just as studying a photograph of a dinosaur exhibit can support a student's understanding, an immersive virtual reality experience of the same exhibit can add to contextual learning for children and parents. This is on the right is a Star Wars application to create within the VR application. And on the left, we set up several public workshops with a tech developer, Earthborn Interactive, to help the developer improve his game where VR intersects with 3D printing to actually bring the virtual creations to life. Augmented reality is not immersive, but it uses 2D or 3D digital content, overlaying that content onto the real world. So you can think Pokemon Go. The photo on the right is an outreach librarian at the county fair using augmented reality temporary tattoos with an app called Holotats. The Holotats app was created by a company called Balti Virtual, one of Maryland's successful tech production companies, and they have clients like Under Armour and PayPal. The good folks at Balti Virtual came up with something outstanding for us to apply AR technology to bring local history to life. With IMLS and state library support, we created a traveling exhibit. So you can see in the image on the left, a little bit of that exhibit where it says tannery. And the exhibit contained artifacts, information panels with augmented reality markers, and iPads to conveniently engage the AR. We partnered with Union Mills Homestead to feature their tannery and gristmill. The two AR interactives include narration and animation. They are informative and fun and give students the opportunity to interact with technology in a different context. And we're going to try to show a 30-second video clip here. There we go. So that gives you a sense of the really wonderful animations they were able to create for us. Baltimore County Library also partnered with Balti Virtual for their summer reading program to develop an augmented reality experience as well. And it was implemented as story walks in 2 local parks. So visitors to the park can explore the solar system through 14 brightly colored panels that are equipped with animated 3D images that can be viewed through any mobile app, or rather any mobile device, by downloading the app for free. And I'd like to offer a few tips for media literacy and technology activities. Even if you obtain funding for resources, you can't do it without at least 1 or 2 staff members who are willing to experiment, learn, and share. There are many informal and free learning opportunities online. Oh, I get myself here. There we go. But the more staff you have who are willing to tinker and play, the better for organizational sharing and learning. Staff need the freedom and encouragement to do it. So in addition, there's often a wealth of expertise in the community to help train staff and to conduct programs, from college instructors to hobbyists to young people who just love digital media and emerging technologies. So Claudia is a great example of just one person in the library doing all of this wonderful media literacy and emerging technology. Now, one of the last big pieces I'd like to talk about is we had received a $25,000 grant to purchase a Pepper, the programmable humanoid robot. And Carroll is the second public library in the country to own Pepper. Bravo to Roanoke, Virginia, who was the first. Pepper is being used in industries like retail, restaurants, healthcare, etc. Phase one of the project was to introduce staff and our community to practical applications for robots and artificial intelligence. And amazingly, 82 people came out for the very first demo this past spring. We're in the midst of phase two, which is to teach coding to youth and adults to create applications to run Pepper. For example, coding speech-based interactions and adding behaviors, including dancing. And we could not be offering this spectacular opportunity to our customers without our Pepper team leaders. Bob Kuntz, who's Director of Operations and Innovation, and Jen Bishop, our Emerging Technologies Manager, and Jen's on the left. And you'll notice that Pepper is waiting for her instructions from Jen. Pepper only does what she's programmed to do. And we're going to show an 18-second video clip of Pepper singing Pete the Cat and his groovy buttons.
And Buttonville, he kept on singing his song. My buttons, my three moving buttons. My buttons, my three moving buttons.
So you can see that Pepper's storytime skills are minimal and our children's librarians are not threatened by Pepper. But I'd like to summarize by saying that libraries are not limited to books and the imagination, but now with new media and emerging technology, we can offer new learning experiences. And the key role for libraries is to help children avoid what they call groupthink and learn to think for themselves. So one way to do that is to develop these important media literacy skills and becoming more tech savvy for today and tomorrow's world. I'd like to turn it over to Claudia.
And so my final thoughts are that, media literacy is a vital skill for living and learning in a connected world. And media literacy can be integrated into programs for kids of all ages, both on, a really resource rich scale, or if you have limited resources, you can do that also. So from here, we'd like to take a few minutes to answer questions. And then on the last slide, you'll find email addresses for both Dorothy and I if you want to follow up. And as I posted in the chat as a response to Robin, there will be a resource page shared with you after this webinar. So any of the things that you're curious about are linked and you'll be able to find out more information. So you can post your questions in the chat box and we'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes for questions, and it looks like Brian just posted where you can find the resource page. I'll also post in the chat the link to the webinar page where you can find a copy of the slides, the resource document, as well as example documents that Claudia and Dorothy provided.
And if you are headed out now, thanks for joining us. We're happy to share more information beyond this.
Yes, thank you, everyone.